Eruvin at the top of the page. Gimel Amud Aleph 3a. In the Mishnah, we had seen that the machlokes between Tanna Kama, the Chachamim, and Rabbi Yehuda of whether or not the korah, the crossbeam at the opening of an alleyway, which is required in order to be able to carry in the alleyway, must not be above 20 amos, according to the Chachamim, and according to Yehuda, it may be higher. And Rav explained the basis of this machlokes based on the doorway of the Beis Hamikdash, whether or not a doorway that is taller than 20 amos counts as a doorway. And the Gemara asks a question, according to Rav, if the basis is whether or not it counts as a doorway, so then even if you have a crossbeam at the top of the doorway that is elaborate and nice, nevertheless, you should not be allowed to have it above 20 amos. And in fact, in the Beis Hamikdash itself, it had these alarta, which were these elaborate openings, crossbeams. And the Gemara proposed perhaps that's by the opening of the foyer, not the opening of the Beis Hamikdash itself. In any case, so the Gemara is going to complete that question and ask, well, what's the reason that the halacha says that the crossbeam halacha depends on how it's structured? If you, Rav, are correct that the basis of this opening not being taller than 20 is based on what constitutes a doorway, and the largest doorway we find in the Beis Hamikdash, or in mention as Pesach has an opening, is 20 amos high, so then it should make no difference in its structure. Aloma Amar Rabbi Lai. Why did Rabbi Lai say Amar Rav in the name of Rav himself? Rechava Dalid Alpha Bisha Eina Bria. That this crossbeam, even though that it has to be strong enough, that it can hold a brick, as we'll see later. However, if it is wide enough, it is 4 tefachim wide, where that width, let's say about 12 inches. So if it's wide enough that it can hold, it's wide enough that it's 4 tefachim wide and noticeable, then therefore it doesn't have to be strong. So when do we say that it needs to be strong, that it can hold a brick? If it is narrower than 4 tefachim, but if it's 4 tefachim wide, if it's 12 inches wide or more, then even if it's not strong enough to hold a brick, it nevertheless counts as a crossbeam. And he similarly said, if it has amlarta, which we said in the end, the Gemara is going to say that it's beautiful, it's an elaborate beam which catches the eye. Then it can be, even if it's taller than 20 amma. Rav himself says that. So why would, if you hold that it's based on a doorway, why is it that if it's a nice crossbeam that it's even taller? Nevertheless, it's not a doorway. And it's Aruch, it says he doesn't have to bring it down lower. Amrav Yosef, Amlarta Masnidi. He says, you're right. This is a statement in the Mishnah, though. However, it's a brisa. We have a statement in, if this is not Rav's own opinion, we have it in the brisa itself. Man Ketani La, and whose opinion is it? Amabaya, Chama Berei de Rabba Baravua Ketani La. Chama Berei de Rabba Baravua taught this brisa. So the Gemara says, okay, great. So you have it as a brisa, which essentially means that the statement of that the top crossbeam needs to be the top crossbeam needs to be 20 is only if up to 20 is only if it's not elaborate and nice. But if it's a nice crossbeam which catches the eye, then it could be even taller. So what? Let it be a Mishnah. It's still a question to Rav. According to Rav, that the basis of the Mishnah is on account of whether it counts as a doorway. It's still a question of Rav. But it's still a question according to Rav. According to you, Rav, that it needs to be a doorway. This doesn't constitute a doorway, even if it catches people's eye and it's such a beautiful, elaborate crossbeam. So Rav says, okay. Rav will answer and say, you're right. There is a brisa that says that the amlarta crossbeam would allow that the doorway can be even taller than 20 amma, or the crossbeam on the opening of the crossbeam at the opening of the mavui of the alleyway is allowed to be taller than 20. But I'm explaining our mission. And either way, you're going to have to explain that there's a machlokas, there's a contradiction in the Mishnayos, and a disagreement of these two opinions. So I'm following the other opinion. Mila kashina adadi, the Brisa and Mishnah are not a question. So what are you going to say? It's a machlokas tanaim. One opinion says it's based on a doorway, and one opinion says it's based on whether you'll notice it or not. And and I also say that it's machlokas tanaim. The Brisa does not concur with my opinion, but my opinion is explaining our Mishnah. However, no, he says actually there's no contradiction between the Mishnah and the Brisa, and without Rav's statement, there actually wouldn't be a contradiction. We don't have to say that there's two opinions. Rav is the one who's introducing an explanation in our Mishnah that it's based on a doorway. But we don't need to have that. And without Rav's teaching, our Mishnah and the Brisa can actually work hand in hand and concur. And the basis for the height of the doorway would be something else. What's the reason that the beam cannot be taller than 20 amas high? Because the beam itself is there only as a reminder, as a recognition, you are exiting the boundary of the mavoi into the public domain, into the Rishus Harabim, and you're not allowed to carry. So remember to check your pockets, or remember to put down anything that you are holding. That's the reason it's there. Even though that the Brisa teaches that it's taller than 20. It needs to be 20 amma. The size of the doorway of the heichal, it's not the reason, it's not the basis, but rather it's a reminder of what number. In order to remember what number did we say is the max, the Brisa said, like the doorway of the heichal, which is because people would know that, and so it would be a mnemonic, a sense of a reminder of what that halacha maximum of 20 basis for the halacha. It's just a sign and symbol.
Why are we dealing solely in the maximum? I mean, presumably there's a minimum too, right? I mean, it's and I couldn't imagine that the minimum would be like we see in mezuzah. That would be too small. People don't. Wouldn't it? What's the minimum? Why do we deal with the minimum?
Well, we'll see. What's the question?
I was thinking that we're talking about what is the definition of a door, but we're dealing with really what's the maximum door permissible for a mavli.
According to Rav. I'm not sure. Are you asking a question?
I'm just trying to know where to focus. So we're according to Rav, we're dealing with the maximum of a mavoi, and according to
now everybody, the Mishnah is talking about the maximum of the crossbeam of Rav explained that's based upon the Rav explains it based upon the doorway in the Beis Hamikdash. Since the doorway of the Beis Hamikdash is maximum 20, so too the height of the crossbeam can't more than 20. Rav Nachman Yitzchak saying actually That's not correct. There's no need to say that it's based on the doorway of the Beis Hamikdash. Rather, it's only it's only a mnemonic, meaning really the reason is not because you need a doorway. I mean, this is the maximum doorway, but rather you need to be able to notice it. People need to notice it so they know this is the boundary, the end of the mavli. And that's what it's there for. And 20 is the height that somebody would notice. Above 20, they won't notice. The reason why the Brisa brings the doorway of the Beis Hamikdash is simply so that we would remember what number was given in the Mishnah as the maximum. The maximum was 20, like that doorway, but not because of that doorway. Sorry?
Like agavorcha.
Right. It's just that using it as it's using it as the a way to remember. So the Gemara says, okay, well, that would be great. That's okay if he doesn't follow the opinion of Rabbah. Eli Svirle the Rabbah, but if he follows the opinion of Rabbah that by Sukkah as well, the reason that the maximum of the height of a schach of a Sukkah is 20 amas is because it needs to be noticeable. The Omar Rabbah, like Rabbah said, Ksiv, it says in the Torah by Sukkah. Why do you have to sit in a Sukkah? Laman yedu dorasechem, so that your generations will know, Kiba Sukkah Zashafti, and that as Bnei Yisrael, so that they will know that in Sukkah Hashem had us dwell in the desert. Now, we have to know that there was schach, and so therefore it has to be noticeable. If it's within 20 amma, a person will recognize the schach and know that he's sitting in a sukkah. But above 20 amma, a person won't notice that he's sitting in schach because he can't notice it. He doesn't see it. His eyes don't see it. Now, obviously, if you look up, you'll see it. But the point is that you may not notice it on its own. Now, if that's the case, that by sukkah, the maximum of 20 amas is because it's not noticed. So why do we need this statement over here and the statement over there that both, you can't have it above 20 because it's not noticeable? Why do I need that twice? Alama gabi sukkah nami be'kera pligi. Fliga b'tata lamali. Alma, so we see that over there, the machlokas between the Chacham and Rabbi Yehuda, whether 20 is noticeable or not, it already exists. Why do I need another machlokas about the same concept here? So the Gemara says, actually, tzricha, I need both machlokas, both conversations. That it's true. Over there, the Chachamim say the sukkah can be maximum 20 high. If the schach is above 20, it's not valid because you can't notice it. And over here, the Chachamim say that the crossbeam of the mavoi has to be within 20 amma. If it's above 20 amma, it's not noticeable, and therefore it's not going to be valid. And why do I need the machlokas in both places where Rabbi Yehuda is going to say it is kosher above, and the Chachamim say it's not? Shiva avidi. The if I would have said so only in regards to sukkah, maybe that's where Rabbi Yehuda says that even above 20 counts. Because you're sitting in there and you're dwelling in there. So sholta be'ena, at some point you'll notice the schach, and that'll be enough. But by the mavli, the alleyway, you're walking down the alleyway. You may not notice something 30 feet above the ground. And notice that's the end. So maybe Rabbi Yehuda would agree to the Rabbanan that here the maximum is 20. And if Rabbi Yehuda had said it only, if we had only said the machlokas here in regards to the crossbeam by the mavel, maybe over here the Rabbanan strict and say that it has to be within 20 because a person's walking and won't notice it otherwise. But in the sukkah, maybe they agree to Rabbi Yehuda because you're sitting in there, you're dwelling in there, you're having your meals in there, so you'll notice the schach. Therefore, tzricha, I need both places. Rabbi Yehuda, Chachamim tell us their opinion that that the Chachamim say 20 or lower, and Yehuda says even above 20. Now, my Amlarta. So what is this Amlarta? And I've been translating as the Gemara is going to conclude, but the Gemara at first tries a couple of different interpretations of what this Amlarta is. I had said it's a crossbeam that is elaborate and nice and will catch the eye. However, Rab Chama Brei the Rabbi Barabua Amar Kini. He says that these are nests. Different interpretations, whether it means that the wood is carved to look like there are bird nests underneath it, and that catches your eye, or because the tops were made so that birds can put their nests there. Ki also Rav Dimi Amar Amri Rav Dimi, when he came from Eretz Yisrael, and we've seen this many times, that Rav Dimi and others would travel from the academies of Eretz Yisrael to the Academy of Babel and vice versa, to bring the teachings of one academy to the other. So when Rav Dimi came, Amar, he said, Amri b'ma'arava, in Eretz Yisrael, in the West, they say, Paski da Arza. It is that the crossbeam extends beyond the supports, and therefore it's noticeable because it's sticking out. Mandama Paski da Arza, the one that says that it is sticking out, Koshken Kini, and for sure the nests would be noticeable. Mandama Kimi, however, the one that says that there are these nests, but off to the side, the beam sticking out at the side, like that wouldn't count as enough to make it noticeable that even above 20 would be okay. So, and according to the one that says that it's sticking out too much, because it's sticking, because it's noticeable on account of it sticking out. Well, the sukkah also, the schach will stick out on the other side. It come Rabbanan delay, and yet Rabbanan say that it doesn't count and it can't be above 20. Ella, rather the kivan, the kachashiv islay kala. Rather, the amlarta is something that is beautiful. It's valuable. It's chashiv, and therefore it is noticeable, and that's why it would count. It would be okay even above 20. We have to understand for the next Gemara that we alluded to earlier, that the crossbeam has to be a strong, solid beam, unless it is 4 tefachim wide. But if it is just a beam, 6-inch, 8-inch, 10-inch beam, that has to be solid enough that it can hold an ariyah. We'll see that later in the Gemara, a brick. It has to be strong. Now, what happens if the crossbeam is part within the 20 amma, and then it's noticeable, but a part of it is above, and that part above, if it doesn't count, and you splice this beam and keep the part that's below 20 virtually, you're not actually going to cut it. But if you virtually do that, you end up with a beam that isn't strong enough to hold an ariyah, to hold a brick. Is that going to be valid or not? Part of the beam is within the 20 amas, but part of it is above. And similarly, schach, some schach is within the 20 amas and some is above 20 amas. So Rabba made a distinction and said by a mavli, the crossbeam of the alleyway, that's going to be valid as long as some of it is within 20 amma. But by the sukkah, it's going to be invalid. Maishna. And what distinction is there? So the Gemara says, but mavli the kosher, the amrin kolish. But mavli is kosher because we say it's just a weak. It's just a weak beam. In other words, it's noticeable. All you need is that it's noticeable, and the fact that it has to be strong is so that it wouldn't break or blow away, whatever. So this won't, because it has weight above it. But it's the narrow part, or that thin part that's in 20 counts. However, sukkah nami lemakal. So sukkah, why didn't I also say it's just a weak schach, but it's schach. Well, if you're If you're saying that it's weak, meaning you just splice off the top and make believe it's not there, well, actually you'll have too much sun. We know that with the schach of a sukkah, it has to be that it causes, it is a majority shade and a minority is open space where the sun can get through. And if you cut these so thin, actually it'll be too thin and the sun will come through. Well, here too, it'll be so weak that the wind will blow it and it shouldn't count. So you say not because it's weak, but we see it as if it's metal, metal beams, metal plates, and they're heavy, so they're strong even though they're very thin. So why can I say the same thing with regards to schach? That we look at it like it is, in fact, it is more shade than the sun can get in, and let's consider it like that's the case. And even though that you're sort of splicing off the top, it's as if there's enough schach there. So rather, Rava of Parzikia says that the reason is sukkah the liyachid. Sukkah, since it's an individual, a personal space, so you may not remember. You wouldn't remember that some of the thickness of the schach is away, and therefore now all of it is above 20. Let's say you lose some of the lower part of the schach, and it's going to be invalid on account of that all of it is now above 20. And since it's a personal space, no one's there to remind you that it has to be above 20. Mavli Dilarabin. However, the alleyway or the cross beam in front of the alleyway, everybody's going to remind each other, hey, look at that. The bottom of the cross beam is disintegrating and now it's above 20. We need to fix that. So mitkari adadi, they'll remind each other. And that's why, and that's the explanation of why Rabbi would say that in the cross beam, as long as some of it is within the 20, that suffices. But by sukkah, it won't suffice on account of that no one's there to remind you, and so you may not notice or take care of the bottom of the schach disintegrating or falling out, and now all the schach is above 20. However, Ravina Omar, the reason is not because of remembering, but rather sukkah de'oraisa. Sukkah is a Torah obligation, and therefore Achmirubah was strict and say, look, it all has to be within the 20 amas. Rabbanon, Mavoi de Rabbanon. However, Mavoi is a rabbinic enactment, as we saw at the beginning, as we stated at the beginning of the Masechta, that on a Torah level, you can't carry in a proper public domain. But an alleyway, even though it services the public, but it doesn't have the conditions to count as a public domain, so really you're allowed to carry there. And the Chachamim enacted not to carry there in order that people not confuse it with the public domain, and therefore a demarcation at the opening is enough to remind you and say, hey, this is a private alleyway, and therefore you can carry in there. And don't carry in the public domain. And since it's the Rabbanon, they were not strict and said as long as some of it is within the 20 amas, and you'll notice it, that's sufficient. However, Rabbi Bar Masna taught this teaching of Rabbah, but in the opposite. He said that a sukkah is going to be kosher if it's partially within 20 amas, and a crossbeam is not going to be valid if it's partially within 20 amma, entirely has to be within 20 amma. Rabbi said, by the alleyway crossbeam, if it's not entirely within 20 ammas, it's going to be invalid. The sukkah, kshera, by sukkah, it's going to be kosher. Ma'ishna sukkah, the kshera, damrin and kolosh, amavinami lema kolosh. So what's the distinction by sukkah? That it's kosher. Damrin and kolosh. We say it's weak, By mavoi too, we should say that it is weak if it is within partially within 20. And so, but it's there. And so what if it's weak? It's there. So Gemara says no. And it tells Baruch. Well, if it's too weak, then it's going to be a cross beam at the opening of your alleyway that can be blown away. Also, if you make it so thin and weak, then it's going to be more sun than shade. We look at it as if it has enough shade. So to over here, we'll say that it's thin, but like metal that is so weak and that is so strong. Amar Rav Parzikia. So Rav Parzikia said, "Sukkah d'liyachidhi rami anafshi." Sukkah is an individual's obligation. So he's careful and he makes sure that the schach is always proper, and he'll notice if the bottoms are falling away. And he'll remember that it has to be within 20, and he'll fix it. However, the crossbeam of the alleyway, that's everybody's obligation. And when it's everybody's obligation, it's nobody's obligation. Samchi Adadi, everybody says, all right, someone else will take care of that. V'lei mitkri, and no one's going to remember to take responsibility and say, hey, well, let me check, is the crossbeam still in the right place? The Amri Inchi, as people say, Kidra Beishutfi, a pot that two people are taking care of, Lechamimi, never cooks properly, V'lekariri, never cool, but it's never cold. Everybody's relying on the other to make sure that it's cooking. So that's why it's going to be invalid, because since it's an obligation on the responsibility of the masses, no one's going to take care of it. Ravina says actually it's the other way. It's not on a basis of whether you remember, but rather, as we said earlier, it's on the basis of whether it's the oraisa or the rabbanon. But earlier we said it's that which is a Torah obligation, the oraisa, we're strict about. That which is a rabbinic obligation, it's the rabbanon. So we're lenient. Here, Ravina is going to say the opposite. Say, by the sukkah to oraisa, we don't have to be worried that you're not going to make sure that it's done properly, because it's a Torah obligation. People take that seriously. But in regards to the crossbeam, people are going to say, well, it started off within 20, so it was good. It's a rabbinic obligation, and so if it loses it, okay, big deal. People may not take it seriously, and therefore the Chachamim needed to say, no, you need to take it seriously. It's invalid unless you put the entire thing within 20 hours. Rabbi Bar Ula Amazev is a puzzle. Rabbi, the son of Rav Ula, he said that actually both are going to be invalid. It all has to be within the 20 hours. Rabbi says Zev is a kosher. Both would be valid, regardless of whether it is the sukkah or the crossbeam, as long as some of it is within the 20 amas, it's going to be kosher, and that is the halacha, like Rava, because halal sukkah tanan, halal mavu tanan. The reason is because when we mention 20 in the sukkah and 20 in the mavui, it's talking about the space between the beam and the ground. It has to be no more than 20. So as long as you have the crossbeam partially in 20, and the schach partially in the 20, that's going to be sufficient. It counts as schach because you don't have airspace from the ground to the schach of 20 ounces. Amalei Rav Papa l'Rava. So Rav Papa said to Rava, Tanya de Messiah lach. We have a brisa that concurs with you. A crossbeam that at the opening of a mavli that is above 20 amma needs to be lower. Because it doesn't say because. Similar to the opening of the heichal, which was 20 ammas. And there, by the doorway of the heichal, it actually wasn't, the beam wasn't within 20. It's just that the space was 20, was exactly at 20, meaning that the space from the bottom of the doorway to the top of the door, it was 20. So you see what we're looking for is not that the beam be within 20, but that the space is 20. So we have a brisa that says, how does he do this? He puts a cross beam from the edge of the 20 and below. So we see that the edge of 20 below, meaning that the entire beam has to be within 20. Ema ulamala, not from this edge of 20 and below, but rather it's from the edge of 20 and above, and that's where the beam is above 20. The Gemara says, what are you talking about? But the Brisa says that it was from 20 and below. So the Gemara says, the Brisa is talking about something else. And this is what Michael mentioned at the beginning, the minimum height of this doorway. That the maximum is 20 and the minimum is 10 tefachim, which let's say 30 inches. Just as above, the space, the airspace, has to be 20 amas high. So too, the low point, the maximum, the minimum height of this entryway is 10 tefachim, 30 inches. Otherwise, if it's less than that, it doesn't constitute as a cross beam above the mavui, and it would be invalid. The next Gemara is going to deal with what kind of amma are we using. Interestingly, the measure amma, which essentially is like the length of a forearm, an arm. So an amma, when we say amma, there are multiple measures within the Beis HaMikdash, or within other halachas. The measure of amma can be 5 tefach. So a tefach being a fist. So 5 tefach could be two side by side, 5 tefachim, or 6 tefachim. Amma bas chamisha tefachim, an amma of 5 tefachim, or an amma of shisha tefachim of 6 tefachim. Also, we'll see later, there's sochakos, where it's happy, let's call it. So they're loose, or we'll have that atzavos, where they're very tight. And so there are multiple ways of measuring an amma. And the Gemara is going to tell us various, for various halachas, we are going to go with the smaller measure, and for various halachas, we're going to go with a stricter measure. And the assumption in the Gemara is that the reason we're going to be, I said stricter, that's incorrect, with a wider measure, a narrower measure or a wider measure. And the Gemara is going to assume that the reason why we would split this and not just always go with an amma of 6 tefachim is on account of that we're being strict. And we're going to be, wherever it's a stricter outcome, that's what we're going to go with. And if we're talking about a maximum permissibility, so we're going to go with the amma of 5 tefachim. If we're going to go with the minimum space required, we're going to go with the larger one and required. Amar Abayim, Shmei Rav Nachman, Amma Sukkah, v'Amas Mavui, v'Amma Bas Chamisha. The Amma that we speak of when we talk about the halachas of Sukkah, and the Amma that we speak of when we're talking about the halachas of a Mavui, of the alleyway, all those halachas are talking about a 5 tefach Amma, meaning a smaller measure. Amas Kilayim, when we talk about the Amma in regards to mixed seeds in a vineyard, ba'ama bashisha, that's talking about a 6 tefach amma, a larger measure. So amas mavi ba'ama bas chamisha l'mayilchas. So the Gemara is going to analyze each one and say, okay, by the alleyway, in regards to what are we talking about? That you said that it's a amma of 5 tefachim, that it's a smaller measure. So lagove, to the height, when we say 20 amma is the maximum space you're allowed to your beam, well, if we go with amma of 6 tefachim, so then you're allowed 1,200 tefach. 120 tefach. If you're and if we're dealing with a 5 tefach, so then we're talking about 100. So we're going to go with the smaller measure. Well, appear tasmavui, and also for the opening of a mavui, we said that the maximum opening of a mavui can be 10 amos wide. So again, it'll either be 50 tefach or 60 tefach. So we're going to go with the smaller measure and say 50 tefach. Well, we actually have a place where you're being lenient if you're going with 5, because we know that these halachas that we were talking about were the openings, but there's another halacha. How deep of an alleyway counts as an alleyway? Does it have to be 100 feet long? Can it be 50 feet long, 10 feet long? What counts as an alleyway that has the halachas of a mavli? So the halacha is that it has to be 4 amos. It has to be a minimum of 4, which we say is 4 amos. 4 amos. Well, then, if you're going with a amma of 5 tefachim, so that's all you need is 20 tefach deep, and it counts as a kosher mavli. If, however, you say that it's 6, you need 24 tefachim. So now you're being lenient and counting it as a mavui, and you're allowed to carry in there with this crossbeam, even if it has only 20 tefach long, 20 tefachim long. So that's a leniency. So why are you telling me that this is a stringency, and therefore you're being strict and following the tighter measure? Actually, you're being lenient in a different in regard to a different halacha. So the Gemara says, "Command the Amar ba'arba tefachim." So actually, when we said 4, so maybe he's following the opinion that it doesn't mean 4 amos long, but a mavli is going to be kosher if it's 4 tefachim long, and therefore it doesn't make a difference how you count amos because we're not in the measure of amos here. Or perhaps you're right that he's following the opinion that a mavli needs 4 amos, and in regards to that measure, 5 would be too lenient. However, the arba amos, v'roiv amos kama, and when Abaye said that in regards to mavli, we go with a amma of 5 tefachim to be strict. That's in regards to most of the halachas of a mavli. You're right. We'll find individual halacha that it does not, that it's a leniency, and there we'll follow actually that you need 6. Amma sukkah. What about the amma v'sukkah? Ba'ama v'chamisha. Here too, we said that it's a 5 tefach. Lamay hilchas in regards to what? Legovhan l'dofen akuma, for the height, and for a dofen akuma, which is where you have invalid schach at the right near the wall, and we can ignore it and sort of see the wall as arching, and then the schach starts where the kosher schach begins. And there, the halach is that it's allowed maximum of 4 amma. So there also we're going to say 20 tefachim and not 26 tefachim, 24 tefachim, like 6 amma, like 6 amma of 6 tefach each. The Tanya, Rabbi says, I say, Kol sukkah she'ema daled amas al daled amas psula. Well, what about a sukkah where it's lenient, like Rabbi, who says that a minimum size of a sukkah is 4 amas by 4 amas, which is not the halacha that we follow. But Rabbi says that the minimum size of a sukkah is 4 amas by 4 amas, and you're being lenient and making it a kosher valid sukkah, even when it's even smaller, when it only has 20 tefachim by 20 tefachim, as opposed to 24 by 24 that it would require if it was a 6 tefach. So the Gemara says, Rabbanan. Well, maybe Abaye doesn't follow that. He follows the Rabbanan who say that the minimum requirement is your head, your torso, and the majority of the torso, and your table, and that's sufficient. Or you can even say that this is even according to Rabbi. And what he's saying is that the majority of halachas regarding the measure of sukkah were going to be strict and require it to be an amma of 5 tefach. But you're right. Sometimes that's a leniency, and therefore we'll be strict and say that it requires an amma of 6 tefach. Furthermore, Abaye said that kil'ayim, mixed seed, is bashisha, is talking about a measure of 6 tefach. So in regards to what? So the Kollel kerem, the mixed seed of a vineyard, is the halacha where you have your rows of vines and you have a proper structure of a vineyard, and in the middle somewhere you start planting other seeds. So let's say wheat. So that's going to be prohibited. And what constitutes a vineyard is going to be a measure of space. And if you have patches that are non-vineyard, then you're allowed to plant there. And that's really what this is talking about. For a balding in the vineyard, meaning in the middle, in the center of the vineyard, some of the vines died, and so there's no vineyard in the center. And the ring, the dance around the vineyard, meaning the outer perimeter of your vineyard. The Tanan we learned. Karachas akerem. If there's a baldness, meaning an empty space in the middle of your vineyard where the vines died, and now you have an open space. So B'Shami Esrim Ba'arba Amas, you need a 24 amma by 24 amma. You need a 24 amma space in order to be able to plant in there. And Basil say you only need 16 amma. And by Machol HaKerem, and by the outer perimeter. B'Shamei Omrim Sheishes Re'amos, you need 16 amma perimeter. And Basil Omrim Shtemes Re'amos, you need 12 amma perimeter. So these are limiting your planting to having that much of a perimeter. So here we need if you narrow it down to a 5 tefach amma, you're being lenient. And so therefore we're strict and we say no, that the measure is a 6 tefach amma and you need more space in order to be able to plant it. So what are these things? Ezu karachas hakerem, and what is a baldness of a vineyard? Kerem shachar v'mtziusa. You have a vineyard, but the middle of it died. Ein sham sheishes re'amas. If you don't have 16 amma in that center space, lo yavi zera l'sham, you cannot plant there. Because the halacha is, a vineyard is not only the place where the vines are, but also there's a 4 amma space as a perimeter for your vineyard, because you have to have space around the vines so that it can be harvested. So the vineyard itself contains not only where the vines are and not between the vines, but also a perimeter around the vines where you have to be able to maneuver your oxen that you're harvesting with. So that's a 4 amma perimeter. So if you have a 4 amma perimeter, so besides for that, you have 4 ammas on each side of the vines in that baldness, in that spot that you lost. So you have 8 ammas. So according to Beis Shammai, according to Beis Hillel, you need another 8 ammas so that you would have a 4 amma space from where you plant to the perimeter of the vineyard, because the vineyard itself has a 4 amma perimeter. And then if you didn't have another 4 amma until you're planting, essentially it's less than 4 ammas, and that wouldn't count as an individual independent space. So therefore, you need 8 on either side of what you planted. So you need a minimum of 16. However, Beis Shammai, they say that you need 24 because they say you need a space of 8. That the perimeter of a vineyard is actually 8. So you have 8 on either side is 16, and then you need 4 on either side of what you planted is 24. But if you do have 16 ammas space, so then you're allowed to plant in the center enough that you have space to plow. Whatever is left above the space that he has to work, meaning the perimeter of the vineyard and the perimeter of your vines, of your vegetables or grains, so that's sufficient. And what is the outer perimeter? So ben kerem together. So there you have between the vineyard and the the fence. Now, the fence itself, you wouldn't plant right near the fence because the roots of your whatever you plant would damage the fence. So you're gonna pull that in 4 amas, and you also have the 4 amas of the perimeter of the 4 amas of the perimeter of your vines. So that's already 8, and you need a minimum of a space of 4 amas to count as your vegetable patch. And so you need 12. And if you have less than 12, it doesn't count as an independent space. So then you can't plant. However, if you had 12 amma, you can plant over there. As long as you leave enough space for the work, then you can plant the rest. The Gemara says, well, there's actually a leniency in vineyard where a smaller space is going to be, a larger space is going to be beneficial, because in order to count as a vineyard, you have to have space between each row of vines. And if it's narrower, it's not going to count as a proper vineyard because they can't grow well. So there it's a leniency. The Tanana, as we learned, if you have a vineyard that's less than 4 amas, 6 feet apart, Rabbi Shimon Aimer, in a kerem, that's not a proper vineyard. The Chacham say it does count as a vineyard. And the Chachamim say that the middle ones, we just ignore them. So Karabanan. So too over here we could say that this is like the Rabbanan, the Amri have a kerem that it does count for Ibai Sema, or as we said, answered before, Lolam Rabbi Shimon, even according to Rabbi Shimon, that the middle vines are going to invalidate the vineyard. And indeed, usually in regards to mixed seed in a vineyard, it will count as a invalid. It will count as a invalid measure if it's not 6. Sometimes it's going to be valid measure at 5 because that is that's the stringency, that's the chumrah. Tomorrow we'll continue with the other opinions that say that what the measure of a vineyard, these halachas are in regards to an amma, that it is 6 tefachim always, and it's just a question of whether they are tight together or narrow.